I have been speaking about the sexual misconduct and the history of the sexual misconduct that has taken place within the United Methodist Denomination and the Texas Annual Conference administration of the United Methodist Denomination in Houston, Texas, and in surrounding rural areas of the conference. I also wanted to share, there's a lot that I do this as I have things on my mind and I feel like I can have a clear conversation. I deal with health issues that cause brain fog, and sometimes there are pauses in my communication, and it's either because I've lost my train of thought or I'm trying to come up with the right words. And I am also a very introverted person. If I know you really well, I may be talkative, but due to the trauma that I've been through, I really don't like to be around many people. I don't have many friends these days. My closest friend, probably, I have another pop-up coming on here on the screen, would be my husband. He's the one I talk to the most. We're on the phone all the time. I have him on the phone right now while I'm doing this. And the reason is because he works 12 hours a day. And when he works at night. And he will work from 4 p.m. until 4 a.m. He fuels the train for Houston. We met when I was living in HUD-approved housing in Crosby. In less than a year, I was able to pull myself out of homelessness, and I was able to find Boyce, who is now my husband. I told him very early on about my history and what I had been through, because I decided years ago that I was going to be an open book about it, because there were too many people that wanted me to be silent about it. So I knew that that was a sign that I needed to put it out in the open. This was not an easy decision for me, because I'm usually a private person. And there are people, I know that there are people who have known me from the past and probably find the things that I am saying that is hard to believe. However, they have to keep in mind that I moved about every year to every 2 years. So if I was in a town living there, whoever I was around on a daily basis, I was only around them for maybe 1 to 2 years of my life, as opposed to 20 years. And I do these videos as my health allows. This past week has been very difficult for my husband and I. We have been struggling financially because of rising costs. And the reason why is because we are making large payments to pay off our debt so that in a few years we will be debt-free. We have been working very hard. I do gig work on the side, and lately I've been dealing with a lot of fatigue. I have an autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, that I struggle with, which also causes brain fog, and I deal with a lot of fatigue. I'm used to powering through the fatigue. I also found out recently that my iron saturation was at 4%. And so I'm working on getting my health back in order. My husband also recently found out that his iron saturation was at 5%, and hemoglobin was 6.1, and he had to have a blood transfusion. Along with the Hashimoto's, I have been struggling with blood sugar issues and on a blood sugar roller coaster. I have been working very hard to get it under control. I have been losing weight. And I follow a strict diet because I would rather go without something I enjoy than deal with the consequences of enjoying it. I find more enjoyment in feeling healthy and not feeling fatigued and having to get up to go to the bathroom 10 times a night and chug water like crazy. I also, when I grew up in the Texas Annual Conference, I learned to use my voice musically. And I went through intense vocal training in choir and also private voice lessons, years of private voice lessons. I have probably 40 years of training. My voice is not what it used to be, and I have not had a chance to address that with a specialist yet. However, I also have learned how to use my voice in a different way to advocate for myself. And that is what I have been doing. And also, I have been using my voice to share my story to hopefully help someone else and to help my sons. Because I want my sons to see that I had the courage to own what happened to me and to own my healing and to choose how I wanted to heal. The way that I met my husband, I was divorced since 2016. So I was single for quite a while. I did not know how to date because of what I went through. I did not know what a healthy relationship was. In order to get where I am today and to be able to find my wonderful husband today, I had to do a lot of work. We both had to do a lot of work on ourselves. We've both been through our own serious and heavy losses. And the work I did, I researched relationship experts online. And I listened to what they had to say. I read books. I read Janine Roth. I can't remember the names of her books. I guess it's the brain fog. I read her books. And it's on the top of my head, but I can't think of it. I read Fat is a Family Affair by When Food is Love. I read When Food is Love by Janine Roth. I read multiple books that she wrote. I read Fat is a Family Affair by Dr. Judy Hollis. Before my first marriage ended, which clearly, in a sense, it still helped, even though it didn't work out. I read 5 books on marriage. If I don't understand something, I'm going to research it to try to understand it. I've been through years of counseling, many counselors, many therapists. I've been to support groups. I've been to Al-Anon support groups. I've been to AA support groups. I take measures today to protect my mental health. I do not drink alcohol. I do not care for large social settings. I like to keep my social circle small. I try not to overwhelm myself. I also, and like I said, I've read books. I read Melody Beatty's books. I read many of her books that were, I read her book, Codependent No More. I read her, the next book after that, Beyond Codependency. and many of her other books. She was one of my favorite authors, led just an absolutely fascinating life. And I read The 5 Love Languages. I can't remember everything else I've read, but needless to say, I've done a lot of work. I have listened to people who have on TikTok videos, on YouTube videos about recovering from trauma. I've listened to TED Talks about trauma and recovering from trauma. I've listened to audiobooks, Eckhart Tolle. He's one of my favorites. I've listened to Brene Brown, several of her books on Audible. And those are the people that have had a difference in my life and in my recovery and healing. You have to find your own way. You can't, it's not about following exactly what one person says. You have to figure out what is right for you. And you cannot sacrifice your mental health for someone else's comfort. I also wanted to read about this sexual ethics of the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. The Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church is committed to providing a safe, respectful, and nurturing environment in keeping with God's sacred trust. Now, that's interesting that they have that view. And I'm wondering where this, if this concept was just completely absent when they employed Michael Tabb, the Texas Annual Conference, when the Texas Annual Conference employed Michael Tabb under their administration, or when they employed Kendall Graham in their administration. Where was this policy when Kendall Graham was having sex with a minor on the couch in his office and videoing it while he was employed under the Texas Annual Conference? Is this when the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church was committed to providing a safe, respectful, and nurturing environment in keeping with God's sacred trust? Or what about when my father became employed under them, with having a history of my mother drugging me so that he could sexually assault me? And it didn't end with that. I know that I went to School of Missions when I was 15. This was in the summer of 91. My parents didn't have a car because of poor financial decisions on their part. Or maybe it was my fault, right? Because, I mean, that's way more convenient. Blame the 15-year-old because adults can't be responsible. And the youth director for the camp, I had a long relationship with her, friendship, which I never should have had with her because she was an adult and I was a minor. And I didn't have the tools. And clearly, she didn't have the right emotional and the right tools, because that's why she pursued a friendship with a minor. Because if she had, she never would have done that. She had also asked me about, apparently she had heard through some gossip, which it was actually true, that my parents had tried to adopt 3 girls, and asked me where those girls were. Now, I can't quite remember exactly what I told her, but I'm sure that whatever I said was a huge red flag. But, maybe it was my fault. I don't know. Maybe I was totally responsible for the mistakes my parents were making. Maybe I was the problem. That's deep sarcasm on my part. But anyway, I know what I told her had to have been a huge red flag. Now, why she didn't go straight to her district superintendent and the bishop at that time and report it, because it definitely should have been investigated by the Texas Annual Conference. That should have been a huge red flag. My father should have been forced to resign or go on leave, whatever. I mean, I know that the Texas Annual Conference has allowed clergy who've been accused of sexual harassment, regardless of if it was valid or not, they've been allowed to return. So I guess they probably would have allowed a child abuser to return. And it was never reported. Instead, she did the opposite. What did she do? She pursued a friendship with me. We were buddy-buddy. And we should not have been. It was an imbalance of power. I was in a vulnerable position, and she knew something was off. And rather than address it and go to her district superintendent and go to the bishop, she pursued a friendship with a child that was being abused emotionally, that had been abused sexually, and that had also gone through medical trauma and medical abuse. And that is incredibly unethical for a clergy to do. And especially later to blame me as if there's something wrong with me because she pursued a friendship when I was a minor, and I did not have the tools, because the boundaries start, learning the boundaries of learning to have healthy relationships is really supposed to start in childhood with your parents, but that's not how it happened. Okay. So I'm going to start with the first page of the Texas Annual Conference Sexual Ethics, Part 1. This is going to be a series of many videos because I have a lot to cover. And I have a lot of stories and a lot of experiences. Policy and sexual ethics. Right now, I am on page 3. The Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church is committed to providing a safe, respectful, and nurturing environment in keeping with God's sacred trust. Sexual misconduct on the part of any clergy person, employee, or volunteer of any congregation, institution, organization, or agency within the transformation of the world. Sexual harassment is expressly prohibited and will not be tolerated. Isn't this interesting? So, where was this when Shane was coming on to me in the supervised visitation of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church on West 43rd Street in Houston, Texas, that is under the Texas Annual Conference administration of the United Methodist Denomination? Where was this policy? Because I sure as hell didn't invite him. I thought he was creepy as fuck. And yeah, I did use a cuss word. I try not to do that because I really want my message to be heard. But sometimes there just isn't. That's the best descriptive word I can think of, because he was slimy as hell. Really, he was. He was absolutely disgusting. In fact, during the visitation, he would get in my face and flirt with me and come on to me, and I would have to take a step back because clearly I didn't invite him over to come and get in my face and come on to me. But hey, I was sexually assaulted by a United Methodist minister who was employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration that is with the United Methodist Denomination. So clearly I was an old veteran, wasn't I, when it comes to sexual misconduct? So I guess I was the appropriate person, wasn't I? I was the wrong person because clearly it was assumed that I would remain silent. Also, when I sang "Oh Holy Night," because part of that was a survival strategy to get through an uncomfortable situation. Singing is how I have coped with life. It's what I did best, and it's where I am trained the best. And it was Christmas, and I love singing for my sons. That's important for me to be able to share my talent with them. But after I sang "Oh Holy Night" at the supervised visitation of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, I was accosted by Shane, who approached me and hugged me, and he had sweat. He had sweat. You could see the sweat stains on his shirt. He was disgusting. He was nasty. And he came in to hug me. And I didn't feel comfortable to say, no, I don't want to hug you. You know why? Because I was being sexually harassed by him in front of the staff of the Domestic Relations Office. He made unwanted advances towards me in front of everybody, in front of the kids, in front of the staff of the Domestic Relations Office. And that day, it also happened in front of the staff of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. They called him because the Domestic Relations Office shares the contact info, shares information about the parents with St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. Isn't that convenient? And it was very convenient that the staff of St. Stephen's called Shane and asked him, why are you flirting with her? That was a good question. Why was that sack of shit that was absolutely disgusting flirting with me and making unwanted advances at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church? As far as I was concerned, he could go hug a crack whore, because I sure as hell did not want to hug him. But I hugged him. I didn't stop him because I didn't feel safe enough to do that. I didn't feel safe in visiting our sons in a United Methodist Church. Could possibly be because I was aware that there was a United Methodist minister who was employed under the same administration that murdered his wife. That could be. Could also be because I was sexually assaulted by a United Methodist minister that was also employed by the Texas Annual Conference. That was sexual harassment. that went on at a United Methodist Church under the Texas Annual Conference. And they were uninvited advances that were unwelcomed, and nothing was done. But I understand. I'm a seasoned veteran when it comes to sexual assault by United Methodist clergy under the Texas Annual Conference. I'm their dirty laundry, so I can see why it did not matter to them. Sexual misconduct includes sexual abuse, possibly drugging a child so that that child can be sexually assaulted, or a clergy having sex with a minor on the couch and videotaping it, who's employed under the Texas Annual Conference. That's a perfect example. Or Michael Tabb molesting his son in the bathtub just before he murdered his wife, Marla Tabb, in the Methodist parsonage. And Michael Tabb was employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration. Do you see a pattern here? All right, sexual misconduct includes sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual exploitation. So I guess the Domestic Relations Office people and the United Methodist of the Texas Annual Conference and St. Stephen's were getting off on following parents to the restroom and listening to parents urinate and have a bowel movement on the toilet. And also tell a parent that she could let them watch her on the toilet while her kids ran in while she was sitting on the toilet. What is the purpose in that? That's against the safe sanctuary policy. But, let me tell you, I grew up in the Texas Annual Conference, and I can tell you clearly they are into some strange shit. I would know. The guidelines for the prohibition of sexual abuse or molestation of a minor under 18 years of age are set forth specifically in the safe sanctuary policies, which is incorporated into these guidelines. Well, that's a typo. It's supposed to say guidelines, and it says guideline. It's plural, but yeah. Oh, this is great. The next one, they use a Bible verse, so this gets really interesting and biblical. I wonder if they ask what Jesus would do. The Texas Annual Conference believes that every person is created in the image of God. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 27. That all Christians are created equal in Christ. Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 through 28. And that we are called to love our neighbors as well as enemies. Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. We are committed to the prevention of sexual misconduct, harassment, or abuse in any form to address allegations justly. Boy, have you failed on that statement on so many occasions. Contrary to the nurturing community, sexual harassment creates improper, coercive, and abusive conditions whenever it occurs in society. You mean like a parent, another visiting parent, hugging you in front of everybody, and you don't feel safe enough to put your hand up and say, "Don't touch me"? Or how about "Don't fucking touch me, you piece of shit"? That's a good one. Okay, let's continue. Sexual harassment undermines the social goal of equal opportunity and the climate of disrespectful or abusive expressions do not confirm sexuality as God's gift. Well, isn't that interesting? So a Methodist minister's wife drugging her daughter so that her husband, who is a Methodist minister, can sexually assault her is not God's gift? And so then Kendall Graham sexually assaulting a minor on the couch in his office and videoing that. So that's not a gift from God. So if it's not, why would you employ these people? Why would you allow this? If it's not a gift from God, why would you allow it? Or is it that because it's not a gift from God, what you do is you sweep it under the rug? And this comes from what I just read comes from the Book of Discipline in 2012, 161.h. The Texas Annual Conference bears affirmative responsibility to create an environment of hospitality for all persons that encourages respect, equality, and kinship in Christ. So how do you lead people to Christ when you are exploiting them? How do you lead children to Christ when you are allowing people to groom them under your administration for their own benefit or your own benefit? Okay? For all persons that encourages respect, equality, and kinship in Christ, we will neither condone or tolerate instances of sexual misconduct, harassment, or abuse. Boy, is that one hell of a lie. I mean, that is a bold lie. It really is. And I can prove it is. So, how does this apply to Gwen Adams, who was in charge of the supervised visitation, telling me that any allegations of abuse from me are just hearsay? They're not relevant. So does this mean that if anybody, while I was visiting my kids at St. Stephen's, chose to take me in a room and rape me, that if I were to expose that is just hearsay? So if a United Methodist minister has sex with a minor on the couch in his office and videotapes it, is that hearsay? Or is that valid because it wasn't me? Oh, this is good. Definitions: sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. First, I want to say child molestation is worse, far worse than sexual misconduct. To me, sexual misconduct is having an extramarital affair, a clergy having an affair with a church member. To me, that's sexual misconduct, far different than a child being robbed of their innocence and dignity. Sexual misconduct with ministerial relationships is a betrayal of sacred trust. No shit. It is a continuum of sexual or gender directed behaviors by either a lay or clergy person within a ministerial relationship, paid or unpaid. Well, I can tell you, there was a Sunday when I visited Lakewood United Methodist Church. I think they separated from the conference, but this is when they were under the Texas Annual Conference administration. And I was sitting on the back pew, and there was a man that had been watching me in Sunday school class. I didn't realize it until he approached me in the sanctuary. And he began to tell me personal details about his marriage and his wife, and he began crying. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't invite him to come and sit with me. And I was told by a clergy to get up and move. Nothing was said to him. Nothing was done about it. In fact, I was one of many women that he did this to. He would go off his meds. He would pursue and prey on another woman within the congregation, and nothing was ever done about it. It can include child abuse, adult sexual abuse, harassment, rape, or sexual assault, sexualized verbal comments or visuals, unwelcome touching and advances, use of sexualized material, including pornography, stalking, sexual abuse of youth, or those without capacity to consent, or misuse of the pastoral or ministerial position using sexualized conduct to take advantage of the vulnerability of another. Book of Resolutions 2012, page 136. I had an example, but well, all of this, pretty much most of it, my dad attempted with me. But I guess the Texas Annual Conference doesn't really consider it relevant if it's a pastor who is employed under them and pursuing sexual advances towards his own child. They're okay with that. Sexual harassment. Oh, and we just covered this. Is any unwanted sexual comment, advance, or demand, either verbal or physical, that is reasonably perceived by the recipient as demeaning, intimidating, or coercive. Sexual harassment includes, but not limited to, the creation of a hostile or abusive working environment resulting from discrimination on the basis of gender. Book of Discipline 2012, 161, it's either point, that's 161 point I think. It is unwanted sexual or gender-directed behavior with pastoral, employment, ministerial, including volunteers, mentor, or colleague relationship that is so severe or pervasive that it alters the conditions of employment or volunteer work, or unreasonably interferes with the employees or volunteers' performance by creating a hostile work environment that can include unwanted sexual jokes, repeated advances, touching, displays, or comments that insult, degrade, or sexually exploit women, elders, children, or youth. Book of Resolutions 2012, page 136. And I have many examples, such as people employed under church and under in churches under the Texas Annual Conference pursuing relationships with minors, platonic or sexual, it does not matter. It is inappropriate. An adult within a church, or any adult, pursuing a friendship with a minor is equally as inappropriate if it's pursued in a platonic manner as it is in a sexual manner.